And you're
I
live.
don't think we have a document.
This is House Education on Tuesday, April 22nd, continuing our discussion of H-130, a bill we are looking at. We are well beyond our crossover date, but we do have time available to be looking at bills that could see final action in the upcoming 2026 session. H-130 is an act relating to expanding the membership and duties of the Advisory Council on Harassment, Hazing, and Bullying Prevention in Schools. And we have the current chair of this said advisory committee today. Rebecca, if you would introduce yourself and tell us about the advisory committee and kind of what it's all about and what you know of its history.
I'll do my best. I'm brand new to the role. We've had one meeting. I just got elected chair. So I wanted to start with that preface.
All right.
My name is Rebecca McBroom. I'm the general counsel for Vermont NEA, and I'm newly serving as the chair for the Hazing, Harassment, and Bullying Prevention Advisory Council. My understanding is that this group was formed via statute maybe 10 plus years ago, thereabouts. And I understand it met for several years and has not met much at all within the last 2 years. And you have the current makeup of the board. Vermont NEA is one of the members of that board, and so that's how I came to be on it. And as I said, we've had we were reconvened by the Agency of Education, I guess you would say, and had our first meeting in, I guess it was in February, and I'm the chair. So the only information I have about it, I did check in with our executive director who was serving on the council and doing the work before I was. And he reported that they were meeting for several years, and he thought it was productive and good work, and that became more contentious, shall we say, over the last couple of years before they sort of disbanded. My other work that I've done on this issue is I was on the Hazing, Harassment, and Bullying Prevention work group that was a legislative study committee. That was, I just had to look at that again. We finished that work in 2023 and then submitted a recommendation in 2024. And as far as I know, I don't know what the movement has been with that. But my experience on that council as well was that it was a large group and there was it was hard for us to sort of come to agreement, I would say, on issues at the end. I think that we had several different documents because the group couldn't sort of agree on one recommendation. So that's sort of my framing of this issue and how I came to it. And I'm very sort of really into the work, but of course I work with educators across the state. And so I'm very aware of how important it is to our educators and how much they reach out to us for resources and information. And surely I have the understanding that it's something that's near and dear to the heart of our teachers and our educators. So certainly we are extremely supportive of the work of the council. And, I can tell you that that's especially with the national political climate that we hear right now. They're reaching out to us constantly asking sort of what to do to protect our students and make them safe havens. So in reviewing the language of H-130, I noticed that one of the biggest changes was, expanding the number of members. And, I think that those that are closest to the work always have the best solutions and the most knowledge, right? So I'm happy to see with the membership that there's more students that are included, and there are parent that's going to be included. And then many of these organizations were on the working group, the new organizations, and I have deep respect for them and know that they're dedicated to this work. So as far as that increased participation, I think it's great to get a diversity of voices. I just hope that some of what I've seen is that a large group can figure out how to work together. There's no reason they shouldn't be able to work together collaboratively, but my hope would be the larger group doesn't impede the group from making progress. And I think that it's probably helpful for the duties that there's more defined duties, I think, than I think it was sort of expansive with a lot of guardrails, the formal language of what the duties of the council were. So it appears to me that that's more detailed and more specific, which hopefully would make it easier for the council to move things forward.
Can I ask, when you became chair, what was your what were you told was the role of the advisory council?
Right.
I understand that it had been dormant for at least 2
Right.
years.
Right. I mean, that was sort of my understanding, as I knew that we have a HHB model policy, which I'm sure you're aware of, that hasn't been updated as far as I know for a number of years. And districts can either they can do something more than that policy, or if they don't create their own policy, that sort of becomes the backup, and that policy is in place. So I know that that needs to potentially be updated. And I know that was part of the work of the group, as far as I understand it, is that they were supposed to work, I think, in collaboration with the AOE to keep that updated. And then beyond that, it seemed pretty broad, right? More of a general advice around this issue.
I think it was review and coordinate school and statewide activities relating to the prevention and response to harassment, hazing, and bullying. It was fairly broad, although it remains in the new bill.
Right.
As well.
I think what I'm seeing in the new bill that would be helpful is, again, from my perspective, not as the chair being brand new to the role, but as the general counsel for Vermont NEA, is that I think that trainings are really important, and getting into schools and I know that you're going to hear more from the executive director of the HRC, but see something that's more proactive versus reactive, right? How do we stop this from happening in the first place? And if it's pervasive in schools, what are we doing to try to help and support so that we can really.
So what would the advisory council's role be in trainings? Not necessarily doing them, because you're all volunteers.
Well, it looks like at least in the new bill, there's it looks more specific under subsection D about best practices, restorative practice frameworks, differentiated responses. So I think that that's a little bit more specific. My other concern, of course, is, I think this is going to be asking public schools to do more, right? And we're always asking public schools to do more with less, right? So it's like, how is this? It looks like the intent of the new bill is the advisory council will do a lot of this work, and it's going to have to be implemented through schools, and then there are people that are going to have to implement that, and positions, and so that would be my question: is where does that additional, especially with the context of everything that's going on right now in the nation and in the state, how is this really important work going to be funded? Other question, I didn't prepare a lot.
No, that's okay.
Because
If it's been dormant for 2 years, it's a little.
I'm new and I into this role, but I certainly am happy to answer questions that you have.
Representative Hunter?
Yeah, just I want to rewind. You said the precursor group that you were on, it got somewhat contentious, and I thought, what about? There was a breakdown. How?
I think it's different. Again, you're getting together different stakeholders,
Sure.
coming from a different perspective. So I think that my understanding is perhaps the school boards association or those other groups are worried about sort of liability and issues, and then there's just there's sort of people, I think, coming together that care about public education, but from perhaps having their own constituents from different perspectives. And I can't speak a lot to it. Honestly,
Right.
I was brand new to it.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, I just thought for a hazing and bullying thing, it'd be weird to. But
I wonder when we created that task force, if we even knew that this advisory council existed.
Right. And do you think, I think we counted maybe 18 members proposed. Do you think that that's too large? And do you think that it would, a similar pattern might take hold?
Not sure. That's just like,
Okay.
that was my only concern looking at it, is that, that's a lot of different voices.
And a lot of good ads too, right?
Right,
Like, yeah.
But if you need to have, I'm imagining if this is reconstituted, maybe we'll vote on the chair again, and then we'll, let someone else take on this really important role, but,
Yeah.
just that, it needs to be well moderated, right? So that's productive.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Should you, as chair, or the advisory council itself have suggestions for us for changes? You could maybe send out a survey to the members that still exist.
Sure.
And say, hey, would you look at H-130?
Yeah.
What do you like, what don't you like, and maybe report back to us, that'd be great.
Sure. There is one thing I wanted to mention, and that is that for the Vermont NEA, they've had there's a couple areas where it allows for a designee, and then there's other areas where it does not allow for a designee.
Yep.
So it says it would be a teacher appointed by the Vermont NEA. That can be rather difficult for us because our teacher, superintendents usually have more flexibility in principals, and they can do this work as part of their school day. Our teachers are in the classroom a lot of times teaching, our educators are working, and so, we think that this should be a designee, and also for one person to speak on behalf of 13,000 members is, so we would request that we would be able to have a designee and do some of that. Make that decision internally.
But that wouldn't prevent the teacher
No.
from being appointed. Yeah. Thank you.
Could be a retired teacher.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Charlie, you're up if you'd like to have a seat up there.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about H-130. I am Charlie Glisserman. I'm the policy director at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. A brief overview of the network, as this is the first time I've been in this committee discussion. We are Vermont's leading voice on domestic and sexual violence issues. We are a membership organization and represent 15 member organizations who are providing direct services to survivors of domestic and sexual violence and their families, as well as prevention programming in their communities. And together we serve every town in Vermont. We also have a few direct services programs at the Vermont Network, including a statewide legal clinic, and also do a fair amount of youth organizing and prevention work within the network. So those are the perspectives that we bring to a bill like this. So hazing, harassment, and bullying, we know, can have devastating impacts on students' health, well-being, and academic success. And so we come at this bill with the interest of preventing gender-based harassment and sexual harassment in schools, and ensuring that schools, administrators, and students have the resources that they need and the guidance that they need to respond appropriately and prevent hazing, harassment, and bullying. And so we came to this bill working with interested stakeholders in the off session to see what is a step forward that we can take on this bill that would largely get agreement from the folks around the table. And so this is what we came up with, and we hope that it is a small but meaningful step forward with revisions to the council. We feel like if done well, these revisions can really be an investment in future legislative work on hazing, harassment, and bullying by having a body of needed stakeholders and structures for ongoing work, including legislative recommendations in this area. As Rebecca noted, the council was established in statute in 2012, and with some kind of general language for its charge But despite the critical importance of this work, as you heard, it hasn't met regularly and sometimes, which has left students, educators, and administrators without needed guidance on these issues. It is tasked with working with the Agency of Education on updating model hazing, harassment, and bullying policy, but that hasn't been updated since 2016. And it also hasn't had a strong relationship with the legislature. And measures to ensure that the council will continue executing work for schools, which I think contributed to it not meeting consistently in the last few years. So, taking a look at the bill, we kind of had a lot of discussion about what we could do to reset the council and make sure that it was ready to meet this very urgent moment and provide guidance to schools. So this bill revises the charge of the council to provide better direction for its work, including more regular reviews of the model policy on hazing, harassment, and bullying for schools. We looked at revisions to its membership to be better representative of people impacted by hazing, harassment, and bullying issues. So that includes students, advocates for communities disproportionately impacted by hazing, harassment, and bullying, and educators and administrators working in our schools. And so recognizing the testimony from the NEA just before around kind of a designee as opposed to an educator, that's something that I think a shift in that language is something we would be comfortable with. When having discussions around what was critical on hazing, harassment, and bullying, we consistently heard that it needs to be like implementable in our schools. And so we really wanted people who are working directly in our schools to be providing input on what these model policies and resources look like. But I think some language around, guiding folks who are selecting designees around that interest in having folks working directly in our schools involved in decisions and discussions around the council, I think is something that we could look at and come back to the committee with if that's something that you all were interested in. And lastly, the bill strengthens the council's relationship with the legislature by providing some new hearing and reporting requirements. And we feel like these reports could really provide legislators with valuable information, including recommended policy changes and resources needed at the Agency of Education to support future work on hazing, harassment, and bullying. So I know that Big has some more historical information to share about the council and its work. So I will stop there and would be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Questions, committee members? So just from a strictly political point of view, nothing to do with anything else, but we will never probably say 18 is a good number. And so, any recommendations you might have to make that number smaller, you don't need to have them right now, but would be really helpful to us. And there are also a couple of organizations on here I've never heard of, the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont. Do you know much of what that's all about?
I think Big could share a bit more
Great.
about the Education Justice Coalition.
And same, I said, with the Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network. Yeah.
Yes, VSARN.
Yep.
We would be happy to. I mean, these are both organizations that are kind of dedicated to representing the perspectives of students in hazing, harassment, and bullying work.
Great.
But would certainly be happy to both, share more information and also connect with these stakeholders to take another look at membership. It's our intention that folks who are participating in their professional capacity will not be seeking a per diem. I think that is typically what members of the council who are participating as part of their role have been doing, and that would continue in the future.
That's good to know. Questions? You said that one thing that the advisory, I'm a little confused and perhaps Big can give us a little more historical background as to who the advisory council is there to advise, whether it's the AOE, whether it is people in the field, because you said, well, it'd be a place where people in the field can go for guidance. Really, it seems to me that if a school is looking for guidance, the agency itself is where they should be going for guidance. So who do you see this group as advising, since it's an advisory council?
It is my understanding that it is advising the Agency of Education. And so, I think the direction here would be working with the Agency of Education to better equip the agency in providing guidance to schools. I think part of that could also be direct communication and resource generation, both for the agency and then directly for stakeholders and members of the council to distribute back to their communities.
Any questions? Great. If it's okay with everybody, we'll move right into having Big Hartman come and speak to us rather than waiting until 3 o'clock, which I'm sure would be preferable to everybody.
I just have one last note on the membership appointment for Outright Vermont.
Yeah.
As the council currently exists, the secretary of the Agency of Education can add members to the council. And so previously, an Outright staff member served on the council in one of those roles. And so when we were taking a look at expanding student participation and membership on the council, we recognized that Outright Vermont does a really outstanding job with youth organizing, and we wanted them to have the opportunity to have a student represented on the council. So that is why that language is kind of as it is.
Thank you.
Of course.
Just a question.
And I really just wanted to thank the committee for its work and, many other colleagues in the House who have done a really excellent job in elevating these issues and the voices of students and educators. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Have a seat, Big. Thanks for accommodating our schedule by being here early.
Pleasure. Okay, so I did make slides and I thought I should share them
Great.
on the screen. So we just have to wait for technology to allow for that. And I just wanted to introduce myself generally. I'm Big Hartman. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. I use they, them pronouns. This is my first time talking to your committee this year. So I thought I'd just say hello and let you know I have some general documents about our work in case some of you are unfamiliar. I brought our annual report from last year that I still have some copies of, like hard copies, if you like that kind of thing. And I also brought a guide document that I created last year for parties to our cases so that they have a plain language, understandable, accessible information about what the Human Rights Commission complaint process looks like. So I'll just kind of pass these around, no pressure, but just for your information.
Since I wasn't here in January, I don't already have. There you go.
And which one? There's enough there. There's enough.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Big, I don't know if it's in your testimony, but sure we have time, but just to sort of kind of go over the process for when there is a HHB complaint and when it might reach the Human Rights Commission.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Got it.
At any point.
Yeah, just trying to get a full screen view. There it is.
Right.
Okay. Just a little background on me. I've been an attorney here in Vermont since 2005, believe it or not. Started in labor law, and then I ran a solo practice called Welcoming Workplaces, focused on harassment prevention. for about 7 years before I joined the Human Rights Commission as a staff attorney investigator back in 2021. As an investigator, I did conduct investigations involving harassment in schools, so I'd be happy to share some of my insights there. But I've been executive director since July of 2023, and in that capacity, I am now overseeing all of our investigations, our policy work, and conducting primarily for the last year, I've been conducting all of the intakes that are coming into our office involving school allegations. So I'm happy to talk about the issue more broadly, but I'll move along with my presentation today. Where I thought, as I was listening to when this bill was first introduced, it was feels like years ago, right, in February. And I felt like maybe some historical context, like how did we get here? How did we come to have an HHB statute, policy, advisory council? All of this might be helpful to kind of frame the issue. Okay. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of an HRC overview, share some of that historical context, talk to you about what are the statutes and the framework that we're working with here. What do I see as our current reality with HHB, and why we support the current bill that you're looking at, H130. Okay, so the mission of the Human Rights Commission is to promote full civil and human rights. Our task is to enforce Vermont's anti-discrimination protections. So our jurisdiction has 3 main buckets: housing, state employment discrimination complaints, that's employment complaints just involving the state of Vermont as the employer, and then the large bucket of places of public accommodation. Schools are included in the definition of a place of public accommodation under our anti-discrimination statutes in Title IX. It actually is defined as any school, in case you were wondering. And so we end up investigating primarily 2 types of school claims, and sometimes there's 2 in one case. The bulk tend to be harassment complaints. But also, if a school feels that, or if a family feels that their child has been treated differently because of their membership in a protected class, that's another form of discrimination that we could investigate. And our agency is listed in what are the current HHB model procedures. We're listed as the state agency to whom complaints of harassment should be filed. Along with that is the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, which we are increasingly concerned may not be taking on a lot of civil rights complaints that they historically have.
Has in fact ruled on 1 or 2 Vermont cases in the past year.
Yes, they have in the past year, correct. And those were the result of years-long investigations. Definitely the school cases are some of the most complicated cases that we deal with. It's a lot of, often harassment cases are going to involve a series of events that took place over time, involving a number of witnesses and administrators and teachers and students even. And so it can be quite a lengthy complaint process, certainly longer than anyone involved with the process would like it to be. Our agency has 3 staff attorney investigators who are the people doing the investigations. That's all of our investigations in all of our areas of jurisdiction. So that just the reality of the backlog of their cases is another reason that these cases tend to be delayed. We've definitely had cases where folks have aged out of the school by the time we have a determination in the case, or by the time we finish the investigation. It is less than ideal, but it is genuinely the only place that families have to go if they want the matter investigated by a state agency. So our investigators will do a pretty comprehensive investigation. This is more than just allowing position papers by both parties. This is about getting in and interviewing every witness that might have relevant information. requesting and reviewing any documents from anyone, it may be the school, the family, third parties, additional folks who might have information that's relevant to the investigation, and then creating an investigative report about kind of summarizing the facts of the investigation, and then doing a legal analysis about whether or not there's reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred. And if we find that there is reasonable grounds, we have a 6-month time period in which we're supposed to try to work with the parties to try to see if there's a settlement or a resolution of the complaint that can be reached, which we're also doing throughout the course of our investigation. But once you've got a reasonable grounds determination, there tends to be a little bit more motivation to sit down at the table and try to resolve it, right? If we are not able to resolve that through a settlement, then we have the ability to enforce the anti-discrimination protections by filing a lawsuit in court, where the Human Rights Commission itself is the plaintiff. So we do not represent anyone in the case. We do not represent the families who are claiming that they've been discriminated against. We are representing the public interest in having a discrimination-free school. Okay, that's the overview on the HRC. Okay. So I just really felt it was important to give you the historical context of these protections and how we got here, because people have been working on this issue for decades in Vermont, and I don't want any of that work to go unaccounted for or forgotten. So we're not recreating that work all over again. But back in 1994, Vermont passed our first state law that addressed harassment in schools and recognized unlawful harassment as a form of discrimination. It also required a harassment prevention policy for all schools and a procedure for there to be designated employees at schools to receive complaints. After about 5 years of that law being in place, the Vermont Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights conducted a study and a survey of kind of how things were going with schools, with the school climates. And what they found was that racial harassment was both frequent and common across all grade levels, and that school personnel were, quote, ill-equipped and poorly trained to respond appropriately to incidents. Of course, folks were concerned about this and took it to the State House. And in 2000, we saw some additional changes and continuing refinement of the definition of hazing and harassment and the protections that were associated with those in Title 16. So a few more years went by, and in 2003, the same Vermont Advisory Committee on to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights created a supplemental report. And I think that they had been hoping to see like progress in the years since the first report had come out, but they did not find that. Instead, they found that there was still lacking a coordinated statewide plan to address the problems. And again, like they had in the first report, they noted that there are fiscal constraints that were limiting the ability of what was then the Department of Education in Vermont and our agency, the Human Rights Commission, were really lacking in the fiscal resources needed to develop statewide prevention programs and to intervene with victims and to help schools resolve like ongoing issues that keep cropping up. And I will say, as I sit here today, I still see these same realities playing out every single day, both for schools, for the Agency of Education, for the Human Rights Commission. In fact, I would say that the problems have escalated over the years instead of been improved, despite, I think, so many folks being really dedicated and invested in solving these issues and making Vermont schools a more welcoming place for all people. So another relevant piece I just thought I would mention, since I know you're also talking about the phone-free school bill coming up, is that in 2009, there was a study committee that the Human Rights Commission and other stakeholders were participating in about harassment, bullying, and especially cyberbullying of students in Vermont. And that report was presented to the legislature with significant findings. I think it's a great resource that is, you can poke around on the HRC website and find it. And it had recommendations, including, again, coordinating a comprehensive training program for prevention that included training for students, for staff and for administrators. This is kind of like an ongoing theme that we're seeing through the decades. And I still think that there's a real need for that today. So that was 2009. Now in 2012, the law is passed that will create this advisory council that we're talking about today. Its function was to review and coordinate school and statewide activities relating to prevention of and response to harassment, hazing, and bullying. Similar makeup as what we have today. 6 organizational representatives, one of which is the Human Rights Commission, and then others selected by the agency head were permitted. And they are required to make annual reports to the legislature. But as you'll see, the last report was made in 2016. So something's not going right with the operation of this council. At that time, though, they had reviewed the newly updated model HHB policy and procedures, made suggestions. It really seemed like they were advising the Agency of Education about how best to continue to refine the response and the information guidance for schools and administrators in trying to prevent HHB.
I have a kind of a basic background question. So HHB, model policy, all of that, this is really a Vermont thing. It wasn't a federal requirement at any time. And is it uncommon across the country, or does pretty much every state have, in statute HHB sort of model policy requirements?
Well, I can say that discrimination in schools is protected under federal law. That's why we have a federal Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education. And harassment would be captured under that. I'm not aware of federal laws about hazing and bullying. I might ask the National Education Association what their scan of what other states are doing on those kind of broader issues. And often bullying will lead to harassment, or there's that fine line of, can we show that the bullying is actually because of somebody's membership in a protected class, which is when it's going to cross that threshold into harassment and into our jurisdiction. That HHB policy that we're talking about, the council contributing to updates to back in 2015 is still the policy and procedures that schools are using today, and has not been updated at all, even though our times are changing, the school environment is changing. And I think that there's a lot of input from all folks involved with these policies and procedures about how they may be working and may not be working. I will say also, we still see many schools that are failing to follow those policies and procedures regularly. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about what are the statutes that we've been talking about here. So most of this is covered in Title 16, and Title 16 has a section 570 that states the policy of the state of Vermont. And I'm just going to read it to you. It states that all Vermont educational institutions shall provide safe, orderly, civil, and positive learning environments. Hazing, harassment, and bullying should have no place and will not be tolerated in Vermont schools. No Vermont student should feel threatened or be discriminated against while enrolled in a Vermont school. We are not fulfilling this policy right now for our students. Section 11 of Title 16 is where all of the legal definitions that we apply are laid out. There's a definition of harassment, hazing, and bullying. And then in Section 570, we see where there's requirements about schools to have prevention policies and procedures. It's a very general requirement. And so that's why schools really need these model policies and procedures that are provided by the Agency of Education, because it really doesn't spell out any of the details. It's just saying you've got to have a policy. And then there's specific provisions about harassment, hazing, and bullying in 570 A, B, and C. There has been a lot of conversation in recent years about what to do with section 570F, which has been written in part to address some of the case law in Vermont that came out interpreting harassment and hazing protections in through civil court litigation. And 570F is the section that we look at all the time in applying the appropriate standards. And it really speaks to the school's duty to act and respond to harassment. Essentially, schools that know or find out or have reason to know that harassment is occurring or hazing and bullying need to take prompt and appropriate actions to stop that and to remedy any harm. There's also been specific provisions, and I think this is where there's been a lot of disagreement among stakeholders about the ability to bring harassment claims in court. And so that is laid out in Title 16. And a lot of the debate has been about, should we change the severe or pervasive standard for harassment? And that's what the last working group that was meeting in 2023 was really tasked with evaluating. How is the severe or pervasive standard preventing harassment? Is it? And should there be some other standard that should be used? The severe or pervasive standard in all other types of harassment claims in the state is lesser. It is not severe or pervasive. And so that's why I think the choice was made to not decide on that question yet and to have a study committee to look at the issue. And I think there's still a lot of conversation left to be had about where things are at now and whether it's actually serving all the folks we're trying to protect from harassment. So that's the statute. I want to give you a picture of what we're seeing on the ground in responding to the harassment complaints that are coming to our office in increasing amounts. What we're seeing overall is that school harassment complaints that are being filed or sought to be filed at the Human Rights Commission are increasing both in frequency and in the severity of the conduct that's being complained of. So we're seeing more of them, and what we're seeing is very severe instances of harassment. Often we are seeing cases involving race and color. That's kind of the most frequent form of harassment that we're seeing, but we have also processed many involving disability, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex. Often we're seeing more than one protected class. As folks have intersectional identities, of course, they're going to be targeted for multiple marginalized identities. And we are also seeing, just by way of context for you, that often the conduct complained of is happening at school, but it's also happening over social media or using school computers or school equipment or school Wi-Fi or Google Docs that are used by the schools to carry out that harassment as well. I will say that these are by far the most gut-wrenching intake meetings that I have. I really feel like there needs to be a support group for parents who are doing such hard advocacy for their kids who are usually the only one like them in their class, sometimes the only one like them in their school, and are being targeted at all ages, all the way from kindergarten to high school. I think middle school is kind of the worst, but and the parents become these tireless advocates trying to push for more action to stop the harassment. And the schools are struggling with knowing, well, what are the procedures I should follow? What can I tell the parents? You know, how can I stop this from happening? They really need support too. And sometimes the legal system is available for them to assert a claim, but at that point, so much damage has already been done. It's not a solution to prevention, right? It's really just these complaints that come our way are after. And people are saying to us, we need you to step in right now and stop this. And we're like, that's not what we do. There's nothing urgent that we can possibly do for you right now. But if you can be patient with me, in about 3 months, I might be able to draft your complaint and get it sent to the school. And I mean, people have been waiting longer than 3 months for our office to have the bandwidth to draft their complaints after an intake meeting. It's really hard to turn these cases away. We do have discretion in what cases we can accept. We can't accept all the cases that come our way, and it's really hard to turn these cases down. So we do have more and more of them coming in. In the past 2 years, we have completed 9 investigations involving school harassment. Some went no reasonable grounds, and that was the end of it. But parties got the benefit of knowing that it was looked at by an independent state agency. They get the benefit of knowing more about, especially for families, of knowing more about what the kids, what the school did with the reports, which a lot of it is protected by confidentiality under FERPA. And so the family often doesn't know that the school did an investigation, disciplined the student, took action to separate the kids. A lot of that stuff is never known to the family until they've gone through our process. And sometimes that makes them feel like a little bit better about the situation, but those cases have had, there have been reasonable grounds cases that we have caused. A few of which I can say have settled. The settlement amounts before going to litigation, the settlement amounts have ranged. The lowest settlement we had in the last 2 years was for $10,000 in cash payment, but that's also along with what we are often requiring, in which the schools are generally not resistant to, which is some training, some planning, some new policies and procedures, some new systems of support for dealing with these issues. We call that public interest relief, something that's going to help us feel like this isn't going to happen to another kid in this school again. And you may have heard that there was one of the largest settlements in HRC history in the past year, which was a race discrimination, a racial harassment claim that resulted in $175,000 settlement.
Might this be a good time for you to sort of tell us what does it take to get elevated to the Human Rights Commission? In other words, what steps are available first for somebody who has a complaint?
Every person that comes to us is describing to us numerous outreach they have made to try to get the problem addressed at their school. Typically, they're talking to the teacher, then they're talking to the principal, then they're talking to the principal again, then they're talking to the superintendent. They're not seeing change, the problems persist, and then they go to AOE. AOE does not provide direct advice or do investigations. They have the option to seek an independent review of an investigation. Some folks have done that option as well. They don't have to. They can come straight to us. But we're not going to take a case unless we know you've got the school on notice and you still feel like the school has failed to take the action that was appropriate. As we sit here today, we have the HRC currently has 92 active cases that are open right now, and 12 of those are harassment complaints. Actually, that 12 is active investigations. So I would say that's probably about 15% of our entire investigations that we're doing right now, of all of our investigations.
Meaning 15% are school-based harassment.
School-based harassment. And there are 6 families waiting for me to draft their complaint that I've accepted for investigation. We are, as I said, increasingly uncomfortable relying on the Federal Department of Education to conduct investigations, especially those involving trans students. It's not going to happen. There's no way. We are really the only avenue for these folks. Most of these families are working class folks who are not going to go filing their own lawsuit. They're going to come to us where we're a public agency designated to receive these complaints. It's a rising problem in Vermont, and it really does need all of us to get our heads together and come up with some strategies for supporting schools, students, and families through these really challenging issues. As we've been resolving cases and getting kind of more attention in the media, especially about harassment complaints, we've gotten requests from schools and school districts to provide trainings. Historically, back when the advisory council was active in the past, the HRC undertook to do trainings for schools when requested. And we have taken time, and by we, I mean, I have taken time to do those investigations in the past year. So we've done, trainings in the past year. So I've done 3 trainings for large groups of faculty and staff about harassment prevention. So we're laying out what is HHB, what are the legal requirements, what are the policy and procedures say, and then what can you do to prevent harassment, some basic like unconscious implicit bias trainings, and then bystander intervention trainings. What I'm observing from these trainings is that information is badly needed. Very few schools are getting live in-person trainings. They're being handed PowerPoints at the beginning of the year, along with everything else when they're starting their new school year, and it's just another thing. When they get a few hours to sit down and talk about these issues and learn about these issues, there's a huge receptivity that I'm finding to that. There's a lot of enthusiasm and eagerness to learn more and to do more to help our students. I find that very encouraging, and it's just a matter of there being time and resources for there to be folks doing these trainings, because there's really no other entity that I'm aware of. Outright has done some programming for schools, and that's specifically focused to, trans and queer inclusion. And that's great, important, much needed culture building at school. And that's one part of the prevention puzzle, right? But in terms of like the base legal requirements under HHB and prevention strategies for when staff members witness something in the moment, that moment can have such an impact on that child's feeling of safety. So if they are skilled and have had training on it, they'll be more equipped to respond to that in a way that does not create a hostile environment for that child and for other children who witness that.
How is the HRC's capacity for doing those trainings?
We do not have the capacity for the training. I take time out of overseeing all of our investigations, all of our litigation, testifying here, and doing fair housing training and education to do this because I know how important it is and because I've talked to so many families who are impacted by this. We greatly need more investigators and more trainers statewide. The advisory council is an important option to think about a more inclusive way to get a statewide program going. I mean, this was recommended over 20 years ago, and there's still, as we sit here today, is not a statewide training program about prevention for rank and file teachers, staff, students, none of it. So I see this bill that you're looking at today as a step forward. It's not going to be the solution, right? But it's going to be a step forward to making sure many of our priorities are met. First of all, broadening the membership will bring fresh energy and much needed momentum, new momentum to these conversations and to this important work. Expanding the membership to include individuals with direct experience tackling these issues, teachers, the folks who are on the front lines of trying to address harassment in the moment and kind of seeing what the trends are now with today's students is really important. It will lead to more meaningful discussions, both about solutions and strategies. And we see that including the voices of individuals directly impacted by HHB, students, families, and their advocates is crucial to moving this forward with an equity lens and an inclusive framework. I personally think that having a large membership means that more can be done. If you have strong leadership of this advisory council, you break into subcommittees dedicated to specific topics, and you have more bodies thinking and working on the issues. And I have certainly been a part of other councils that will do subcommittee work and report back to the council and be creating training, modules, be creating curriculum, be creating new resources, and they can divide up that work that way. If you've only got 7 or 8 people to do all this work, you're not going to do as much. it really does take like strong leadership and inventiveness and a willingness to take that extra time outside of the full council meetings. But I think it can be done, and we certainly need more human bodies working on this issue at like a 180 degrees, or I mean, from a big picture perspective.
And do you think it should be the advisory council's job to come up with trainings and all of it, and writing curriculum and all that? I mean, these would all basically be volunteers who, in order to meet that goal, would really have to be dedicated to making it happen.
It could be about making recommendations here at the State House, coming next year and saying, here's what we've studied, here's what we found, here's what's needed, engaging with Agency of Education, engaging with the NEA, with the HRC, and the other entities that have capacity, interest, and expertise in moving these issues forward at a statewide policy level. So I do think that it's not necessarily that those are going to be the folks doing it for the next 10 years, but that they can be thinking about the framework in which we can carry out statewide programming. That's really badly needed. And I really think that the requirement for biannual review of the current policies is really needed. Like, times are changing. Students are changing, especially as school makeup and different things are going to be changing in the school systems. It's going to be really important that there be a mandate to continually review and revise that. And right now we don't have that mandate. It's kind of just at the whim of the agency. And when the agency is short-staffed and busy with a million other things, it's not going to be a priority. But if this is the council whose sole job is to look at this, that there's going to be someone keeping, multiple eyes keeping a focus on this issue and building that institutional knowledge over years. And I also think that having those delineated duties about what we want to see this council looking at is really helpful, because the broad role that has been outlined for years has really left it up to the dictates of the current administration of like, how are we going to use this council or not use this council? And that has resulted in 9 years of very little work product to speak of. And the recommendations around that, or the provisions in the bill that would have this council create or identify resources for prevention strategies, that's really badly needed. It is lacking now. You can go on the Agency of Education website. There's like very little about how to actually prevent harassment. We've created our own curriculum because there was this very clear gap in that information being out there. And there was a history of our office having done that. So I could pick up a binder from Tracy from 2015 and see what we were telling folks then. That hasn't really been updated though. There's so much more emerging knowledge coming out about strategies. And pooling the knowledge of the larger council really could fill some of the gap that we're seeing now in the information that's available for school. And I also think there's a lot to be said for an annual joint legislative hearing about this issue. This is the first time I've talked to this committee about HHB this year, and let's if for symbolic purposes, nothing more, let's make sure we're convening legislatively to hear about these issues and to know that it's still a focus for us, because there's a lot of students and families who don't feel like enough is being done at all at the state level. That was a lot of talking, but I've been thinking about this just a little bit.
Well, you certainly make a great case. Very good case for an advisory council that has basically been dormant on such an important issue.
Yeah.
Other questions? I think that we would, having created groups and councils and task force of large numbers, and having always been told, I'd say 100% of the time, it's really hard to manage a group of whatever size. I think that might be one of our concerns, and so we'd be open to any suggestions you might have for fewer than 18. Because it does seem to me that at 18, it requires pretty strong leadership to make that a ship that big go in a straight line and forward.
So you could establish who's chairing it. I think the value of having all of these voices is, instead of it just being a representative of school boards, to have a school board member means that you're getting the voice of like real people who are trying to carry this out in their communities, and you're getting statewide voices. If you're only talking to 5 or 6 people, you're just not getting the inclusiveness that you need. And if the council finds that it's unworkable, we can come back and talk about that. And we can figure out ways to, centralize some of the decision making so that it's still an effective model. That would be my input on that. I'll be definitely tracking this and seeing and talking with the folks who are listed on there about who's, how did their names all get on there, and who doesn't feel like they have a voice. But I can comment about Education Justice Coalition is a coalition of multiple groups that have been working on education justice issues in Vermont for several years. I would encourage you to invite a representative from that very small nonprofit to hear about their work. They're really doing student-driven work. They host leadership events. They just did, with a small amount of grant money that we had, they just hosted a Train the Trainer event for student harassment prevention training, so that students can bring this training into their own schools and do peer-led harassment prevention. So I think that it's a really important voice of both advocates and students who are dedicated, to racial justice issues, especially. And it includes groups like the ACLU, the Outright. There's a lot of overlap with other advocacy. It's a coalition-based group. So it's not like one person. And then VSARN is the Vermont Students Against Racism Network is a nonprofit that's propped up in the last several years. It's a network of students. It's student-led work to try to confront and address racism in their schools collectively. And they did have an event here at the State House last spring. They were, like a leadership day. It's a student leadership organization. And I think it's really important that students have a voice in conversations about how to prevent them from experiencing harassment. They're the ones with the closest picture to what's going on with their peers.
Great. I think, as we really try to do our best to include student voice, it's just good to know that there are organizations to turn to, and including nominating students to serve the state in these capacities. It's really helpful. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, thank you for bringing us your annual report.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. I'm sure this probably arrived in legislative mail at some point, but appreciate you.
That was back in January.
Yes, that was
a lifetime
decades ago.
And I'm happy to come back any other time if there's other issues that I can share with you about what we see, in our work trying to prevent discrimination in schools and other places of public accommodation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that there's real hunger for training, and I think the capacity to do that is probably woeful, hopefully lacking across the state. And it can go a long way.
Yeah, while there was a lot of disagreement in that working group last year about solutions, one thing that everyone agreed on is there's a need for more resources and training, and there's a hunger for it. There's a hunger for it across the board. Parents want more education and training, students want it, administrators want it, and the rank and file teachers want it.
While we have you here, I'll just ask this question because you brought it up. But that, complainants don't have access because of FERPA to what was done to address it. And I just wonder how many cases would not be elevated if that stuff could be shared.
Yeah, and I see administrators struggle with that confidentiality as well. Like they have to say, we're addressing this, but because of confidentiality, we can't say anything more unless the if there's discipline, the disciplined students, family, caregivers can give permission to disclose that information. I haven't seen many of those cases, but I only see the cases where they're usually in the dark and they just don't feel it and anything adequate was done. And frankly, discipline is not always the way to stop
Right.
harassment or to stop bad behavior by any child. I have a child and I don't see that being a strategy for prevention.
Well, and schools are hamstrung by the fact that they have to provide an education for both
Right.
parties and accommodate their need to be educated every day.
Well, one of the good things about the proposed bill is that it specifically references restorative practices. And that's something that we also see schools trying out with limited success and maybe limited expertise there. And it is like about creating opportunities for healing from an event instead of it just becoming this entrenched trauma that is really hard to escape in school every day when it's the same people in the same class from kindergarten to high school, you know.
Are schools responsible for hazing, harassment, and bullying that takes place outside of the school day and outside of sort of the school environment?
If it impacts the educational environment, then they need to take it into account. I think there are cases where I've heard administrators just tell parents, well, that happened on the weekend, so we can't do anything about it. But you still have a duty to keep the child safe and the school environment to be orderly and free of harassment. So we can't fully turn a blind eye. And it's not about you can't make it not happen over the weekend, but you can address the student's sense of safety when they return to the building, especially if it's something that someone's flagged for you. This happened. Now they don't want to come to school. And you know, there's a domino effect that we see in these cases. It's a very disturbing pattern that can result in severe mental health decline for these kids and even suicide.
Yep.
Great. Thank you very much for all your time this afternoon, and the
Thank
history
you.
was
My pleasure.
was right on point for us.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All right, everybody.